Hello and welcome to Business Standard. Here's a glimpse of the views expressed on the web pages of Business Standard this week. The farm laws, by and large, are good for the farmers and India, but whether the farm laws are good or bad no longer matters, writes Shekhar Gupta in his weekly column National Interest. The Modi government is right when it says it's no longer about the farm laws, because nobody's talking about MSP, subsidies, mandis and so on. Then what's it about? The short answer is it's about politics. And why not? When the UPA was in power, the BJP opposed all its good ideas, from the India-US nuclear deal to FDI in insurance and pension. As far as farm laws are concerned, the Modi government has already lost the battle. The government now has two choices. It can let it fester, expand into a larger political war, or it can cut its losses and get off the curb. Gupta writes, the Indian government does not recognize any employment problem in the country, writes Mahesh Vyas in a column for Business Standard. Two recent key statements the government made about India's economy, the economic survey and the finance minister's speech, did not recognize the fact that millions of Indians have lost livelihoods. The finance minister's speech contained no specific measure to help the unemployed or to generate employment directly. The finance minister also made no mention of Manrega. The allocation for the scheme is 73,000 crore, about 35% less than the revised estimate for the last fiscal. The proposal to set up textile parks could generate employment. Textiles, in fact, is the largest manufacturing sector employer in India, but even so, this program is unlikely to move the needle on employment. Similarly, the higher allocation for roads or housing is unlikely to make a material difference to employment. Vyas says that the challenges on the employment front are much bigger. It is important to note how Finance Minister Sitaraman has departed from her predecessors in presenting a post-contraction budget, A.K. Bhattacharya writes in a column for Business Standard. Unlike her predecessors, she has already at least started 4 new initiatives. 1. She has made the budget numbers and fiscal deficit more transparent by reducing the off-budget borrowings in a big way. 2. The sizable increase in capital expenditure reflects the continued commitment to spend more in this category. 3. There have been no attempts to tinker with the direct taxation base. Lastly, Sitaraman's budget has a series of bold announcements and new schemes. These include the government's decision to allow foreign direct investment in insurers up to 74%, privatizing 2 public sector banks and an insurer. These initiatives were long overdue, writes Bhattacharya. A group of people holding an elected government to ransom and a government turning against its own citizens in the name of law and order are both troubling in a democracy, writes T.N. Nainin in his weekly column for Business Standard. He says that while people have the right to protest, if protesters insist on an all-or-nothing approach, and if governments start putting spikes on highways and building concrete walls alongside barricades, then representative democracy has slipped into more problematic territory. To deal with the situation, says Nainin, the government must regain credibility, and not just with farmers, but also with other sections of the public who now believe that those ruling in Delhi no longer represent them. That means the government must look for broader acceptance of its laws, even if it can enact them without difficulty, since it now controls both houses of parliament. Nainin concludes by saying that this is the larger national narrative that needs addressing. Given the double challenge posed by the economy and the Chinese intrusions into Ladakh, the management of the defense budget over the current financial year seems praiseworthy, writes Ajay Shukla in a column for Business Standard. The military has deployed around 40,000 soldiers on the remotest parts along the border with China without greatly overshooting the revenue budget. Second, the 3 services have managed the crisis with China without busting the capital budget. Third, the 3 services have created resources by reducing the pension payout by nearly 9,000 crores. In what would be a repeat of this miracle, the pension allocation for fiscal 2022 is down by another 9,000 crores. This suggests that the army has confronted and blocked the world's second largest military power, equipping itself with emergency purchases that have been paid largely by pensioners, Shukla says. In a column for Business Standard, Tamal Bandyopadhyay highlights 3 key elements in the budget that were cheered by the equity market led by the bank stocks. The first is privatization of 2 public sector banks. After 51 years of bank nationalization, the government has finally admitted that it should not be in the business of running all public sector banks. The second move is the creation of a development finance institution for infrastructure financing. Finally, there will be a bad bank. an asset reconstruction company, and an asset management company will be set up to consolidate and take over the existing bad loans of banks, manage them, and sell them to alternate investment funds and other investors. While a development finance institution will help banks de-risk their loan portfolios, creation of a bad bank will clean up their balance sheets, Bandyopadhyay writes. The best thing about the budget is that it has eased the fear among importers that the government would raise customs duty and turn protectionist again, writes Sukumar Mukhopadhyay in a column for Business Standard. Nothing like that has been done. On the other hand, changes have been made in duties both upwards and downwards, depending upon the nature of the industry. For the iron and steel industry, the rates have been reduced for several items to neutralize the rise in prices of iron and steel products. To benefit farmers, the budget has raised the customs duty on cotton from nil to 10%. However, a negative aspect of this budget is that it proposes to review more than 400 old exemptions this year. Reviewing the existing exemptions is an ongoing job done by the budget team, and they should not say that they will do it over the next year. Now, the situation is that whether 400 exemptions will be withdrawn or how many will be withdrawn will remain unknown, Mukhopadhyay says. Despite the economic challenge confronting India, Arun Jaitley's 2016 budget continues to be the gold standard for this administration, writes Ratin Roy in a column for Business Standard. The recently announced budget showed little evidence of an economic strategy or a medium-term spending battle plan or a reform strategy to change demand composition or even foster export-led growth. There are several welcome standalone reforms, but these do not add up to a coherent strategy to achieve a $5 trillion economy or secure self-reliance. There's no particular logic that has been given for the new fiscal responsibility and budget management trends. We must, however, be thankful for small mercies like increased transparency, some positive initiatives to simplify tax administration, and the attempt to bring off-budget items into fiscal accounting, Roy writes. In a column for Business Standard, Srinath Reddy writes that the 35,000 crore allocation for COVID-19 vaccination is probably for the purchase and administration of vaccines, but one also needs to see here if the purchase is for domestic purposes or also includes international friendly shipments as part of COVID-19 diplomacy. But the Finance Minister has said that we will spend more on vaccines if the utilization is more. We will need to wait and see if the allocation rises and if the allocation money comes from the budget or the PM Cares Fund. The allocation for vaccines will not cover the remaining over 250 million of the total 300 million target that the government has. There's no clarity yet on how this fund will be raised, how much states will contribute, and how much the new vaccines will cost. The Finance Minister has left it cryptic by saying that we will give more if needed, Reddy writes. What has changed in the new budget is the government's fiscal conservatism and therefore spending strategy and willingness to push reforms, writes Business Standard in an editorial. These include opening up to more foreign ownership of insurers, churning the ownership of government-created assets, selling public sector banks, and trying out previously discarded financial reforms like a bad bank and a development finance institution. Other than the last two, which have history against them, the rest are to be welcomed, the editorial says. Faced with a hard fiscal situation, the Finance Minister has worked hard to present a budget that has boosted sentiment. But if the budget is a bet on growth, Sitaraman should be aware of the risk of it falling short, since various commentators have argued that the economy's medium-term growth potential has been affected. The only way to deal with that is through sustained reform measures that boost productivity. That is another reason to welcome what has been announced, the editorial says. How well did the budget address the concerns of those most vulnerable to the disruptions of the pandemic? The only fair answer is not well, writes a Business Standard in an editorial. For instance, it's not clear why the outlay for Manrega has been slashed by a third, given that there is ample evidence of continuing joblessness. Some rural infrastructure schemes will continue to be funded, and the integrated schemes focused on women and very young children are being restructured. But is it good enough in a year when a record number of Indians fell back into poverty? The fact is that strategies for creating more employment opportunities in the medium and long term through upgrading infrastructure may have their benefits, but in a year when the short-term concerns of the most vulnerable are so intense, it appears the Finance Ministry has come to the conclusion that the pandemic is over, the editorial says. In an editorial, Business Standard says that the military coup in Myanmar soon after national elections gave Nobel Prize winner Suu Kyi and her party a landslide victory shows the importance of building robust institutional safeguards for democracy to endure. The military has reasserted its power just 6 years after the country transitioned to democracy and held elections in 2015, which handed power to a civilian government led by Suu Kyi and her party. The military has claimed election fraud without evidence and despite denials from the country's election commission. India's government retains a warm relationship with Suu Kyi and the military and continues to send the country humanitarian aid. Since Suu Kyi's party has resolved to sort out this controversy by peaceful means, wait and watch is the only option now, the editorial says.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.